He storms into the kitchen where she's making dinner, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm the man of this house. What I say goes." She looks up from cutting vegetables, raises one eyebrow and calmly responds, "And? What exactly does that mean to me in 2025? The silence that follows is deafening. He realizes in that moment that the magic phrase that worked for his grandfather, his father, and countless generations before him has suddenly lost all its power. Welcome to the modern world, where simply being born male no longer grants you automatic authority, respect, or obedience from women. The days when, because I'm the man, served as sufficient justification for leadership are as dead as flip phones and dial-up internet. Today's women aren't impressed by your chromosomes, they're evaluating your competence. This shift has left millions of men confused, frustrated and angry. They were raised with the expectation that their gender would automatically earn them respect and deference from women, only to discover that modern women require actual proof of value before following anyone's lead. The old system is broken, and many men are struggling to adapt to the new rules. Today, I'm going to reveal why traditional male authority has collapsed, what actually makes modern women want to follow men, and most importantly, how to build the kind of leadership that works in a world where being a man isn't enough anymore. What we're witnessing across the Western world is what I call the authority collapse, a systematic breakdown of traditional gender-based power structures that once gave men automatic leadership positions in relationships and society. This collapse has fundamentally changed the rules of romantic and social dynamics. The authority collapse began when women gained economic independence, educational opportunities, and legal rights that made them less dependent on male provision and protection. As women developed their own competencies and resources, the practical justifications for automatic male leadership disappeared. This collapse created what I call the competence arms race, where women's increasing capabilities have raised the bar for male leadership. A woman who runs her own business, manages her own finances and makes her own decisions isn't going to be impressed by a man who thinks his gender qualifies him to make decisions for her. The authority collapse also destroyed what I call the tradition shield, the cultural protection that once made questioning male authority socially unacceptable. Modern women are not only allowed to question male leadership, they're encouraged to demand proof of its value before accepting it. This collapse has created a generation of men who are promised authority they can't deliver, and women who are taught to expect competence they rarely encounter. The result is widespread relationship dysfunction, power struggles, and mutual resentment between partners who are operating under incompatible frameworks. The authority collapse isn't inherently good or bad, it's simply reality. Men who understand this new landscape can thrive by developing actual leadership skills, while men who resist this reality will continue to struggle with relationships, career advancement, and social influence. Understanding the authority collapse means recognizing that modern leadership requires earning rather than assuming, demonstrating rather than declaring, and proving rather than presuming. The men who succeed in this new environment are those who build competence rather than claiming birthright. In the post-authority world, men face what I call the competence imperative, the requirement to develop actual skills, knowledge, and capabilities that justify leadership rather than relying on gender-based assumptions about authority. The competence imperative operates on a simple principle. If you want someone to follow your lead, you must be demonstrably better at leading than they are. This means developing superior judgment, decision-making skills, emotional intelligence, and practical capabilities that make following you the obvious choice. This imperative creates what I call the excellence requirement, where men must consistently outperform the women they want to lead across multiple dimensions. It's not enough to be good at one thing while being mediocre at everything else. Modern women evaluate total competence packages. The competence imperative also includes what I call the continuous improvement pressure, where men can never stop developing their capabilities because women's competencies are constantly advancing. Yesterday's impressive skills become today's baseline expectations. This imperative is particularly challenging because it requires men to compete on merit rather than relying on systemic advantages. Many men who succeeded under the old system discover that their actual competencies are far lower than their position suggested. The competence imperative creates what I call the authenticity filter, where women can quickly distinguish between men who have real capabilities and men who are performing competence without possessing it. This filter makes traditional masculine posturing ineffective with modern women. Understanding the competence imperative means accepting that modern relationships require men to be actually valuable, rather than just traditionally masculine. Women will follow men who enhance their lives, not men who simply demand their compliance. The imperative also reveals why many modern men feel inadequate despite having more opportunities than ever. They're competing in a merit-based system using identity-based expectations, which creates inevitable failure and frustration. The foundation of effective modern leadership is what I call the merit authenticity matrix, a framework where leadership authority is earned through demonstrated value rather than claimed through positional power or gender identity. The merit authenticity matrix operates on the principle that followers must perceive genuine benefit from following before they'll voluntarily comply with leadership. This perception is created through consistent demonstration of superior judgment, beneficial outcomes, and authentic care for followers' well-being. This matrix includes what I call the proof requirement, where claims about capability must be supported by observable evidence of success. Modern women don't accept leadership based on promises or potential. They require track records of actual achievement. The merit authenticity matrix also involves what I call the value demonstration process, where leaders must consistently show that following their guidance produces better outcomes than independent action or alternative leadership. This process requires ongoing proof rather than one-time demonstration. The matrix creates what I call the voluntary compliance dynamic, where followers choose to follow because they recognize the benefit rather than being forced to follow through external pressure. This dynamic produces genuine loyalty rather than resentful obedience. The merit authenticity matrix also includes what I call the competence transparency principle, where effective leaders openly acknowledge their capabilities and limitations rather than pretending to know everything. This transparency builds trust and credibility. Understanding the merit authenticity matrix reveals why authoritarian approaches fail with modern women. When compliance is voluntary, leaders must earn continued consent through ongoing value provision, rather than demanding obedience through threats or manipulation. The matrix also explains why some men struggle with leadership despite having formal authority in workplace or social contexts. Authority without merit creates resistance rather than compliance, even when people are required to follow orders. Effective leadership in the modern era requires what I call the command wisdom principle, the ability to issue requests and make decisions that followers both can and will comply with willingly. This principle prevents the power struggles that destroy relationships and organizations. The command wisdom principle operates through what I call the capability assessment framework, where leaders understand the skills, limitations, and current circumstances of their followers before making requests. This assessment prevents issuing commands that are impossible to fulfill. This principle includes what I call the willingness evaluation process, where leaders gauge their followers' emotional state, motivation levels, and current capacity for compliance before making demands. This evaluation prevents triggering rebellion or resentment. The command wisdom principle also involves what I call the timing intelligence component, where effective leaders understand when to push for compliance and when to provide rest, support, or flexibility. This intelligence prevents leadership from becoming tyrannical. The principle creates what I call the natural compliance effect, where followers want to comply with leadership because requests feel reasonable, achievable, and beneficial. This effect eliminates the need for coercion or manipulation. The command wisdom principle also includes what I call the context sensitivity requirement, where leaders adapt their approach based on changing circumstances, follower development, and environmental pressures. This sensitivity ensures leadership remains effective across different situations. Understanding the command wisdom principle reveals why micromanagement and rigid control strategies fail in voluntary relationships. When followers can leave at any time, leadership must inspire compliance rather than demand it. The principle also explains why some men who are successful in hierarchical work environments struggle in romantic relationships. Command structures with enforcement mechanisms require different skills than influence structures based on voluntary compliance. One of the most destructive mistakes modern men make is falling victim to what I call the position authority fallacy, the belief that holding a title, role, or identity automatically grants you the right to lead others without proving your worthiness for that leadership. The position authority fallacy operates through what I call the entitlement assumption, where men believe that being male Being older, being the breadwinner, or having any other positional advantage means others should automatically defer to their judgment and decisions. This fallacy creates what I call the reminder syndrome, where men find themselves constantly having to assert their authority because followers don't naturally recognise or respect it. If you have to keep reminding people that you're in charge, you're not actually in charge. The position authority fallacy also produces what I call the resentment generation effect, where attempts to enforce positional authority create anger and resistance rather than compliance. Followers who are forced to obey authority they don't respect will undermine that authority whenever possible. This fallacy is particularly toxic in relationships because it transforms partnerships into hierarchies based on arbitrary characteristics rather than demonstrated value. Women who are expected to follow men simply because they're men will either rebel or lose respect for those men. The position authority fallacy also includes what I call the weakness revelation problem, where relying on positional authority reveals the leader's lack of actual competence. If your only justification for leadership is your position, you've admitted that your capabilities don't justify that position. Understanding the position authority fallacy means recognizing that all effective authority in voluntary relationships must be earned rather than assumed. Titles, roles, and identities provide opportunities to demonstrate leadership, not automatic rights to exercise it. The fallacy also explains why many traditional men struggle with modern women's independence. They've been conditioned to expect deference based on gender rather than learning to earn deference through competence. The most effective approach to modern leadership is what I call the hearts and minds strategy, a comprehensive approach that focuses on inspiring voluntary compliance through demonstrated value rather than demanding obedience through positional authority. The hearts and minds strategy operates through what I call the benefit demonstration method, where leaders consistently show followers that compliance produces better outcomes than independence or alternative leadership. This demonstration creates natural motivation to follow. This strategy includes what I call the emotional investment component, where leaders genuinely care about their followers' well-being and success, rather than viewing them as resources to be exploited. This care creates loyalty that transcends circumstances and difficulties. The hearts and minds strategy also involves what I call the competence exhibition process, where leaders regularly display superior judgment, decision-making ability, and practical skills that justify their leadership role. This exhibition builds confidence in the leader's capabilities. The strategy creates what I call the voluntary enthusiasm effect, where followers become genuinely excited about following because they recognize the personal benefits of compliance. This enthusiasm eliminates resistance and creates positive relationship dynamics. The hearts and minds strategy also includes what I call the respect reciprocity principle, where leaders treat followers with genuine respect and consideration, rather than viewing them as subordinates to be controlled. This respect generates reciprocal respect and cooperation. Understanding the hearts and minds strategy reveals why charismatic leaders often outperform authoritarian leaders even when they have less formal power. People naturally want to follow leaders who make them feel valued and successful. The strategy also explains why some men can lead effectively without any formal authority, while others struggle to lead even with significant positional power. The ability to inspire voluntary compliance is more valuable than the ability to enforce involuntary compliance. Perhaps the most important insight for modern men is what I call the selection optimization matrix. The recognition that finding compatible followers is more effective than trying to force incompatible people to follow your leadership. The selection optimization matrix operates on the principle that relationship success depends more on partner compatibility than behavior modification. Instead of trying to change women who don't want to follow, find women who naturally want to follow the kind of leadership you provide. This matrix includes what I call the natural alignment principle, where effective leaders seek followers whose goals, values, and preferences naturally align with the leader's direction and methods. This alignment eliminates most potential conflicts before they develop. The selection optimization matrix also involves what I call the enthusiasm requirement, where leaders prioritize finding followers who are genuinely excited about the direction and methods rather than settling for reluctant compliance or resigned acceptance. The matrix creates what I call the compatibility advantage, where natural alignment produces effortless relationship dynamics because both parties want the same outcomes through the same methods. This advantage eliminates the need for persuasion or coercion. The selection optimization matrix also includes what I call the value proposition enhancement, where men improve their attractiveness as leaders by developing capabilities that appeal to their desired followers. This enhancement expands their options for compatible partners. Understanding the selection optimization matrix means recognizing that trying to lead incompatible partners is inefficient and ultimately unsuccessful. It's better to develop your leadership capabilities and find naturally compatible followers than to waste energy forcing compliance from resistant partners. The matrix also reveals why many relationship problems stem from fundamental incompatibility, rather than communication issues or behavioral problems. When partners want different things or have different approaches to life, conflict is inevitable regardless of leadership skills. Today's dating and relationship landscape operates as what I call the modern competence arms race, an ongoing competition where women's increasing capabilities force men to continuously develop higher levels of competence to remain attractive and effective leaders. The competence arms race operates through what I call the rising standards effect, where women's growing independence, education and success create higher expectations for male capability across all dimensions of life. Yesterday's impressive man becomes today's minimum requirement. This arms race includes what I call the multi-domain excellence pressure, where men must develop competence across emotional intelligence, financial capability, social skills, physical fitness, and practical life management rather than relying on narrow specializations. The modern competence arms race also involves what I call the continuous development requirement, where men can never stop improving because women's benchmarks for male value continue rising. Static competence leads to relative decline in attractiveness and effectiveness. The arms race creates what I call the authenticity verification process, where women have become sophisticated at distinguishing between genuine competence and performed competence. Men who fake capabilities are quickly identified and dismissed. The modern competence arms race also includes what I call the niche mastery strategy, where men can compete by developing exceptional capabilities in specific areas that women value highly, even if they're not superior across all dimensions. Understanding the modern competence arms race means accepting that competition for high-quality women has intensified dramatically. Men who want access to successful, independent women must develop equivalent or superior capabilities. The arms race also explains why many men feel overwhelmed by modern dating requirements. They're competing against women's expanded options and elevated standards, while often lacking the skills needed to meet those standards. In the modern leadership landscape, men face what I call the emotional intelligence imperative, the requirement to develop sophisticated understanding of human psychology, motivation, and interpersonal dynamics to lead effectively in voluntary relationships. The emotional intelligence imperative operates through what I call the psychological literacy requirement, where effective leaders must understand how emotions, motivations, and psychological patterns influence behavior and decision-making in themselves and others. This imperative includes what I call the empathy development component, where leaders learn to understand and consider their followers' perspectives, feelings, and needs when making decisions and issuing guidance. This empathy creates trust and cooperation. The emotional intelligence imperative also involves what I call the communication mastery element, where leaders develop the ability to express their thoughts, needs, and directions in ways that inspire cooperation rather than resistance or confusion. The imperative creates what I call the conflict resolution capability, where leaders can navigate disagreements, misunderstandings, and tensions without resorting to authoritarian control or emotional manipulation. This capability maintains relationship harmony. The emotional intelligence imperative also includes what I call the motivation understanding framework, where leaders recognize what drives their followers and can align leadership direction with those motivational patterns. This understanding maximizes voluntary compliance. Understanding the emotional intelligence imperative reveals why many traditionally masculine men struggle in modern relationships. Technical competence without emotional intelligence creates leadership that feels cold, manipulative, or disconnected. The imperative also explains why some men who seem less impressive on paper often outperform more accomplished men in relationships. Emotional intelligence can compensate for other limitations while its absence undermines other strengths. The most sophisticated aspect of modern leadership is what I call the voluntary compliance architecture, a systematic approach to creating conditions where followers want to comply because compliance serves their interests rather than the leader's interests alone. The voluntary compliance architecture operates through what I call the mutual benefit framework, where leadership decisions consistently produce outcomes that benefit both the leader and the followers. This framework ensures that compliance feels like cooperation rather than subordination. This architecture includes what I call the autonomy preservation component, where effective leaders maintain their followers' sense of choice and agency even while providing direction. This preservation prevents the resentment that comes from feeling controlled. The voluntary compliance architecture also involves what I call the value creation focus, where leaders concentrate on making their followers' lives better rather than just making their own lives easier. This focus generates genuine appreciation and loyalty. The architecture creates what I call the natural authority effect, where followers recognize the leader's competence and begin seeking their guidance rather than having to be convinced to accept it. This effect eliminates the need for persuasion or coercion. The voluntary compliance architecture also includes what I call the flexibility integration system, where leaders adapt their approach based on changing circumstances and follower development rather than rigidly maintaining the same methods regardless of context. Understanding the voluntary compliance architecture means recognizing that sustainable leadership requires creating win-win dynamics rather than zero-sum power struggles. When followers benefit from following, compliance becomes enthusiastic rather than reluctant. The architecture also reveals why authoritarian approaches ultimately fail in voluntary relationships. People who can leave will eventually leave leaders who don't make their lives better through their leadership. The ultimate goal of modern relationship leadership is what I call the partnership evolution model, a framework where initial leadership gradually transforms into collaborative partnership as followers develop their own competencies and judgment. The partnership evolution model operates through what I call the development orientation, where effective leaders focus on building their followers' capabilities rather than maintaining their dependence. This orientation creates growth rather than stagnation. This model includes what I call the graduated autonomy process, where leaders gradually transfer more decision-making authority to followers as they demonstrate competence and good judgment. This process prevents both micromanagement and premature abandonment. The partnership evolution model also involves what I call the collaborative transition strategy, where leaders evolve from directing followers to working with partners while maintaining the relationship's positive dynamics. This transition preserves what works while adapting to growth. The model creates what I call the mutual respect equilibrium, where both parties value each other's contributions and perspectives rather than maintaining a permanent hierarchy based on initial competence differences. This equilibrium produces long-term relationship satisfaction. The partnership evolution model also includes what I call the leadership rotation capability, where partners can take leadership roles in different areas based on their relative competencies rather than maintaining fixed leadership hierarchies. Understanding the partnership evolution model means recognizing that the best relationships grow beyond simple leader-follower dynamics into true partnerships where both parties contribute their strengths. This evolution requires secure, confident leaders who aren't threatened by their partner's development. The model also explains why some relationships become stronger over time while others become weaker. Relationships that evolve toward partnership tend to improve, while relationships that maintain rigid hierarchies tend to deteriorate. If this analysis of modern leadership challenges has revealed patterns you recognize in your own life, subscribe to this channel for more insights into navigating relationships and authority in the contemporary world. Hit that notification bell because understanding these dynamics could transform your effectiveness as a leader in both romantic and professional contexts. Share this video with any man who needs to understand that traditional authority is dead, that competence is the new currency of leadership, and that adapting to these changes is essential for success in modern relationships. Remember, being a man isn't enough anymore because women have other options and higher standards. But this isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. Men who develop real competence, emotional intelligence, and leadership skills will find that modern women are more appreciative of genuine value than women have ever been. Your success in relationships isn't determined by your gender, your position, or your traditional masculine traits. It's determined by your ability to add value to women's lives in ways that make following your lead the obvious choice. The old rules are gone, but the new rules reward men who are willing to earn their authority through competence rather than claiming it through birthright. That's a game worth learning to play.